Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. Today I'm going to talk about the major differences between Capture One version 21 and Lightroom Classic, with the hope that it will help you decide which one of these applications is best for you. Both of these apps are feature-rich, so it would be impossible for me to talk about every single difference between them in one video. So I'm going to talk about the major obvious differences and the differences that I think might matter to the average photographer. But do me a favor and help me out. If one of these apps has a feature that you absolutely need, and it is the reason why you're using that app over the other app, let us know in the comments below. Now, first of all, let's talk about how they're marketed. Lightroom is available as a subscription only. You could subscribe to what they call the Photographer's Package, which gives you Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Mobile, Photoshop, some space in the cloud to put images to share with other people, and something they call Behance, which is another way of sharing your work and getting comments and suggestions and things from other photographers. They also have packages where you could subscribe to like every Adobe app there is. That of course costs considerably more, and with that package of course it still includes Lightroom, Photoshop, Lightroom Mobile, and space on the cloud and whatnot. So Lightroom Classic subscription only. You cannot buy it outright. When they come out with a new version, you automatically get the new version as part of your subscription. Capture One, on the other hand, is available as a subscription product, so you could pay for it monthly. And when they come out with a new version, you automatically get the new version. Or if you prefer to own the software outright, you can buy Capture One outright, and it's yours to keep. You could just use it all the time. When they come out with a new version, you will have to pay an upgrade fee to get that new version, or you could just keep using your old version and it will keep working. Also, there's different versions of Capture One available. They have Capture One Pro, which will work on just about every RAW file there is. But if you're a photographer that just uses one type of camera, like you only use Sony cameras, there is a version just for Sony. There is a version just for Nikon, and there is a version just for Fujifilm. So if you're a photographer and you just use one brand or one manufacturer cameras, and you never are going to use a different manufacturer's camera, you could either subscribe to or purchase outright the version of Capture One for that camera, and it will work on those RAW files from that camera only. So again, if you purchase or subscribe to the Fujifilm version and somebody gives you a Sony RAW file, you won't be able to edit it in it. It will only work with Fujifilm RAW files. But those versions that are specific to those manufacturers are considerably cheaper than the Pro version. So you could save a lot of money whether you subscribe or buy it outright. So you have a lot more options for purchasing Capture One than you do Lightroom. Now, the other kind of main difference is if we just look at Lightroom, we have all these modules across the top, right? Library, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, Print, and Web. Map, Book, Slideshow, and Web are not available in Capture One. There's nothing similar. So if you often do slideshows or make books or use a map module, or if you're one of the few people that use the web module in Lightroom, you won't find an equivalent type of function in Capture One, period. Now, at first glance, the print module in Lightroom might look to be more robust than Capture One, but in my opinion, it isn't. It is very good. The Lightroom Classic print module is awesome. But Capture One, if you hit Command P on a Mac, Control P on a PC, you bring up the color printer or the printer dialog box. What you'll find if you take the time to look through here is it has pretty much everything the print module of Lightroom Classic has. It's just kind of condensed down a little bit, but it's very robust and you could do a lot with it. So I would say, in my opinion, you could disagree with me, of course, in the comments. I think the print modules are pretty equal between the two apps, or the print functionality is equal between the two apps. So those are the main difference when you go across as far as modules. Now, library module, of course, you have, that's what it's called in Lightroom, but over in Capture One, you just kind of have this tab. It's library tab. And the way both of them work is you import images into the application, and it's called the catalog, right? So you have the Capture One catalog and you have the Lightroom Classic catalog. And when you edit, they're both non-destructive raw editors. So when you edit a raw file, none of those edits get written to the file. They get stored in the catalog. So in that way, they're identical. But Capture One has another feature. It's called Sessions. If you don't want to use the catalog feature, you can instead use Sessions. And Sessions is more meant for the working professional who has a lot of different photo sessions. So if you're doing senior portraits, let's say, and you do a senior portrait for Natalie, and then later that same day you do senior portraits for Thomas, and then the next day you do senior portraits for Lori, you could bring those images into Capture One in a session for each of those three people so that they're separate for one another, unique to each other. So you could just work on, let's say, Natalie's images without being confused and looking at the other two seniors' images. So that's another way that you could do things in Capture One. Of course, you don't have to be a professional. If you're just traveling and, you know, when you were in Milan and you have images from Milan, you could have those in a sessions, and then you have different images from Paris. You could have those in a session, and so on. So, you know, it's whatever works for you. So Capture One has that additional functionality that you won't find in Lightroom. Now, of course, in Lightroom, if we're doing senior portraits, you could have individual catalogs for each, but you could do that in Capture One as well. So that's one difference in the library modules, or library functionality, let's say. Also, both of them have collections, so you could take images from multiple folders and put them together in a collection in both Capture One and in Lightroom Classic. They each do the type of culling that you might be used to, you know, star labels or star ratings, color labels, pick flags, things like that. So all that is pretty similar. So in my opinion, the library module of Lightroom is pretty much the same as the library tab in Capture One. So very similar. Sessions is one thing, though, that is available in Capture One that isn't available in Lightroom Classic. Now, let's talk about editing. Of course, we have the Develop module in Lightroom, and we have the kind of more or less standard controls, I think people might argue. So you go to the Basic tab, and you have Tone, right? And you have Presence, and that includes some color adjustments. Kind of standard. But I think what you'll find if you start using Capture One, pretty much, everything that is in Lightroom as far as editing an image is in Capture One in one form or another. Now, you won't find a texture slider in Capture One, but you will find clarity, you will find dehaze, you will, of course, find vibrance and saturation. They're in individual tabs, and if you're coming over from Lightroom or any other app for that matter, you may find Capture One a bit confusing at first because stuff is kind of spread around in different areas. So we could go to this tab here. This is for tone. And if you see the high dynamic range section of it, we have highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, just like Lightroom. We have a clarity section. You have a clarity and a structure slider. There's no structure in Lightroom, but we have clarity. But we don't have texture in Capture One, so difference there. Exposure, contrast, saturation, all three sliders are in Lightroom as well. We have a brightness slider here that's not available in Lightroom Classic. So if you often need to use a brightness slider, you have it here. I'd say white balance is pretty much comparable between the two, pretty much identical in my opinion. We have dehaze. Now, We have curve. See, it's called curve in Capture One, and over here we have the tone curve. Pretty much identical functionality. There is maybe a slight difference. If we click on this tab in Lightroom Classic, we have what's called the region curve or the parametric curve. And with this parametric curve, you could just move sliders if you'd like, and that isn't an option in the curve that is in Capture One. So if you're used to using sliders instead of using the point curve and actually putting points on, on the curve itself, if you're used to using those sliders, you may find it a little more difficult using curve in Capture One. But Capture One has levels, and those of you that use Photoshop might be familiar with levels, and many of us like to use levels, myself included. That is not available at all in Lightroom Classic. So you won't find levels equivalency in Lightroom Classic. There is vignetting. In my opinion, the vignetting tools, which are in the Effects tab of Lightroom Classic, are a little more robust. So then here we have basically a single slider, and you have a drop down where you could kind of control how that vignette is applied. Whereas in Lightroom Classic, you have more control over the actual vignette itself and how it's applied on the image. So that is slightly different. So that's kind of the tone part of it. If we go to the color part of it, you'll see it's pretty much the same. We got profiles, we have white balance again here. Again, white balance controls in both are pretty much identical. Here we have color editor. That's the exact same thing as the HSL color tab in Lightroom Classic, and it functions the same exact way. So that's the same. We also have color balance in Capture One, and over in Lightroom that is called color grading. It pretty much has the same functionality. There's some sliders there that allow it to blend maybe slightly differently than over here in Capture One, but overall they're very similar to one another. We of course could convert and process images in black and white in both, and both have black and white mixes, so that is nothing different. We have some additional tools here that aren't in Lightroom at all. This normalize is there, and you'll find if you go through the tabs individually and look at all the different tools, there are a few more tools in Capture One that aren't in Lightroom. Granted, some of the tools many people wouldn't use, but they are here and available if you need to use them. So pretty much the developing is maybe 80% similar, and then there's like I said, might be a couple sliders in Lightroom, like this texture slider, that are in Lightroom but not in Capture One. But Capture One has entire kind of tools that aren't available in Lightroom. For instance, the levels tool, the normalize tool down there, and maybe some others. Now real quick, let's talk about tethering. I'm not sure how many of you may tether. Tethering is available in both. I haven't tethered in several years. Since I moved to my new studio, I don't have a monitor in there, and it's kind of a smaller studio, so I haven't tethered in a long time. And when I did tether, I only tethered with Lightroom at the time. But I've heard from other photographers that both tether usually works, but the tethering is a little more robust in Capture One. So if you're in a studio situation where you're tethering to a monitor, from what I understand, Capture One is a little more robust and a little more reliable. If I'm wrong on that, feel free to correct me in the comments below and let me know what you think about tethering in either app. But tethering is available in both, and it just seems like there's more functionality in tethering in Capture One. All right, one thing that Lightroom has at the moment that Capture One does not have is if you right-click on an image, you could go down to Photo Merge, and you could photo merge an HDR image or create a panorama. As it stands right now, you cannot do that with Capture One 21. There is no HDR functionality or panoramic functionality. But coincidentally, I received an email this morning from Capture One saying that HDR and panoramas are their most requested feature, and they're going to be adding it to a future update. So we should see the ability to create HDR images and create panoramic images in Capture One very shortly. But as of today, you can't create those in Capture One, but you can do those in Lightroom. Now, real quick, let's talk about the tools. Well, before I do that, let me mention something real quick about layers. Capture One has layers. Lightroom doesn't have layers at all, period. But Capture One's layers are kind of unique to Capture One. So if you're a Photoshop aficionado, you probably you might be a little disappointed in layers in Capture One, but they are pretty robust once you get into them. Mainly, you're going to use a different layer for your adjustment tools. So when you do a healing brush or a spot tool or a clone, all that will be on its own layer. Also, when you're just doing some type of masking, so you're going to, let's say, put a gradient in the image, that will be on its own layer. Or if you're using a brush tool, that will be on its own layer. So all that gets done on different layers. Also, there is a luminosity mask available in Capture One. There is no luminosity masking in Lightroom. So if you're often doing luminosity masks in, let's say, Photoshop, you could do Luma. They call it Luma Range here. It's just a tool that comes up. Obviously, it's grayed out now because I just have the single layer. But it's just a tool that pops out that allows you to pick what tones you want to mask, so you could add something to it, do some adjustments to it. So that is nice that is available in Capture One, not available in Lightroom. But Lightroom does have masking in the local adjustment tools. That is the brush, radial filter, and graduated filter. So if you wanted to do something, let's say a radial filter, and you wanted to just affect the bird or just affect the background or something, you do have range mask. And let me just like put just a radial filter right there for the heck of it. Right, and all right, so there. And let's say I just want to like darken that background, not anything else, or certain parts. I could go to luminance, and I could get the eyedropper and just click, and it will just mask itself to those tones. Or I could use the color and mask it to specific colors. If this was an HEIC image and it had depth information in there, I could apply the adjustment just to, let's say, the bird, because it would have that depth info, but obviously it doesn't, so it doesn't have it. So those are some, masking is available in Lightroom, but I think most of us would agree that it's just a little more robust in Capture One. You could mask a little more easily with Capture One compared to Lightroom, at least as it stands right now with Lightroom Classic. All right, going across the tools, I mentioned those local adjustment tools in Lightroom. You also have a red eye removal tool. You have a spot removal tool, which consists of two different brushes, a clone brush and a heal brush, and you, of course, could crop. So those are the tools that are in Lightroom. Now, if we jump over to Capture One, you can see that if we go across the top, they have as far as tools are concerned, they have the crop tool. All right, that's pretty much identical to Lightroom. You could straighten an image. That's in the crop tool in Lightroom. Here we have a keystone vertical tool. So if you have buildings that seem like they're falling backwards, you could straighten them. You, of course, could do that in Lightroom. There is an entire tab for that. It's the Transform tab. Let me close this down. The Transform tab. In my opinion, the Transform tools in Lightroom Classic are a bit more robust than the upright tools, the keystone vertical tools that are in Capture One. You could still, work. They work fine. It's just you could do a little more with Lightroom, in my opinion. There's also like a brush tool, allow you to brush specific parts of the image. We have a healing mask. So if you have sensor spots, blemishes, things like that, you could use the healing mask tool. Next to that, we have an erase mask. So if you need, again, sometimes the healing brush might not work very well, but the erase mask may work better. So you could use that. So we have maybe a few more tools and options in Capture One. There's a white balance tool. We, of course, have that same exact eyedropper in Lightroom. Of course, it's just not up with the tools. It's in the basic tab, and it's the eyedroppers right here. So you could adjust white balance there. So that is the same. And then we have this thing here that annotations that Lightroom doesn't have. So if you have to make annotations right on your image, notes right on the image for whatever reason, you could do that in Capture One. You cannot do that in Lightroom Classic at all. So there's a couple more tools, specifically like an erase brush next to the healing brush, which are slightly different than when you go over to Lightroom and you go on the spot removal tool and you have a clone brush and a heal brush. So functionality is a bit different, but they probably you probably get similar results overall with what you're trying to do. So those are the tool differences. Now, Workspace. You have a lot more control over the workspace in Capture One, and this is one feature I do like because often you're not going to use all the tools. It has a lot of tools, or maybe you just don't like the images over here on the right or whatever. And if you go up to Window Workspace, you could use one of their built-in workspaces, like a simplified workspace. We'll see it only has 3 tabs up there now. We go to Workspace, or I have one called My Workspace, and watch this when it kicks in. It's totally different, right? This tab here is my tab, actually, I should say, that has everything in the order I like to do it. So there's the histogram, there's layers, there's lens corrections, there's the crop tool, keystone tool, base characteristics that includes some profiles, ICC profiles, white balance, and so on. So I arranged this my way. Over on the far left, you can see I have it hidden. If I just go over there, it pops out. There is the film strip. So you can't do that in Lightroom. Lightroom is pretty much static the way it is. You could change some of the way it works. Like if I open the basic tab, then go down and open the tone curve tab, you could see how the basic tab closed. That's because I'm in solo mode. If I right click on any of the tabs, you could see solo mode is checked. If I uncheck it, you could have all these open at the same time. Depends whatever you prefer. I prefer to have solo mode on. You also could get rid of them if you find you don't use one, like you don't use the calibration tab. Go to Customize Develop Panel, and you could get rid of the calibration tab by just unchecking it. Click Save, and then it's gone. But that's all you really could do. You can't rearrange everything like I did in Capture One. So that is a nice feature of Capture One that I like and I wish Lightroom had. I could really customize my workspace, and I prefer to work in this workspace as opposed to the default workspace that that you'll see when you first start using Capture One. And this is the workspace I'll have on when I'm normally doing my videos, because I want Capture One that you see in my videos to look like the Capture One looks on your computer, as opposed to if I use my workspace that I use and I have everything over here, and you're gonna have a hard time following along. But when I work on images in Capture One, this is the way I do it with this workspace. So anyway, I think that's pretty much the major and significant differences between the two applications. I'm sure I left something out. So again, do me a favor, help me out. Mention it in the comments below. What you think is a significant difference that I failed to mention. Because I would like collectively, that means the video and the comments collectively, to be able to help someone decide which one of these two apps is best for them. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.